Here on earth, we have, as we talked about before, fallen angels, and we've descended into this ignorance and forgetfulness. And then we've created this government structure that really doesn't serve humanity.
Yes.
There's all sorts of theories that people have about who's really controlling that government structure. I don't want to get into fear-based negative theories, but from my research, it seems to suggest that there are these ancient priest class or bloodline families that they've basically been ruling humanity from behind the scenes for hundreds or thousands of years. Would you say that's correct?
More or less, yes. There's more competition nowadays, though. Yes. Rival groups, rival families, because your species has become more global. So these ruling families largely come from Middle Eastern and European descent. And for a while, that was their world. And they played both sides of all the major wars connected to those areas. But as more groups rose to power, as more families rose to power, the amount of influence that they had began to, you could say, wane a little bit. So those groups are still in effect today, but they're not able to operate in the ways they used to. There's still a level of that, yes, but it's not exactly the same as back when they were in power during your Renaissance, for example.
Okay.
Because they have more competition, they have more groups to contend with. For a while, they operated as what you would consider to be that floating pyramid head on the dollar bill. They operated as the top of the pyramid. But now there's many more pyramids with many more tops to them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there's more competition nowadays. It's not as unified.
Okay. Is there truth to the idea that some of these families possessed occult knowledge?
Yes,
they did magical rituals, and perhaps they
still do.
Yeah. And
they don't call it that.
Hmm.
They don't use the same terms, but more or less, yes. Remember, even the Nazi Party of Germany did occult rituals. It's common. It's very common because it's in you as humans to seek rituals, to create these things for yourselves. And the more a ritual is done, the more powerful it is. Some of these rituals that have been done for a very long time. So.
And the idea that these people aren't very maybe morally pure, and so in their rituals, they've contacted maybe negative entities.
Yes, but remember, all these negative entities are dimensions of yourself that have been externalized in the form of an egregore. So when they're calling on something negative, for example, Moloch or something like this, they're really calling on that dimension of humanity and the egregore surrounding it. So keep in mind that the things they're calling upon, no matter how external they appear, are not things that are ever truly outside of you. Just as when you're calling upon an angel, you're not calling upon something outside of you. There is an external egregore connected to an angel, but when you're calling upon an angel, you're calling upon your power, just a higher level of it. You're calling upon the divine layer to the powers you're using to create your life. So when someone's calling upon a dark entity, they're calling upon the sort of inverse divine power that the lower self uses. That's the idea of a demonic entity. It is this sort of deified version of lower self energy, where the angel is the deified version of higher self energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
All right.
We were talking about this negative, dark element that, you said we contain both the angelic and the demonic. There's an interesting dialogue I've read. It's called the Hidden Hand dialogue. And it's where one of the members of one of these bloodline families, they say that they are acting on behalf of what they call group soul Lucifer. They have sort of contracted to play this negative polarity and be this negative force on earth. And that this is for humanity's ultimate spiritual evolution. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the thing to keep in mind is Lucifer really is just talking about the idea of the morning star, which is Venus. Mm-hmm. So the reason Lucifer is seen as villainous is because Lucifer was this cosmic being, this divine angel that essentially turned its back on God and descended into matter, descended into form. And you're able to observe this with the idea of the being Innana, the Sumerian goddess of love and war, whom is correspondent to Venus, descending into hell, having to essentially be rescued at a certain point. So Lucifer really is a reference to Innana. It's a reference to the idea of a divine being that descends into matter. The idea of the being turning its back on God just means it has lowered its frequency, thus enabling it to forget its true celestial identity, causing it to then incarnate into denser levels of reality. So the idea of Lucifer or Luciferianism being evil, it's not necessarily representative of how those energies operate. That's sort of a novel Christian take on the energies of Lucifer. That's not an ancient or historical understanding of Lucifer or Luciferianism. That's sort of a novel Christian understanding. So whatever the source of this thing is that you have shared with us is, at the end of the day, you can know it's coming from a Christian ideology because that's the context they're using to talk about Lucifer, which means it's not a very ancient understanding. It's novel. So, in other words, take what you've heard with a grain of salt.
Okay.
Because whomever has shared that doesn't really understand the origins of these things. Because
Okay.
Lucifer's not the bad guy.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what they were saying, is that Lucifer's not the bad guy, but it's all part of like a divine play of the positive and negative.
Because that's consciousness incarnating into matter. That's the divine play. It has nothing to do with triggering humanity into awakening. Again, this is sort of a novel understanding of it. Oh, we need to be the bad guys to cause humanity to grow. That's not necessarily a traditional thought process on those energies. That's a novel understanding.
Okay. So in that way, would humanity be representative of this Lucifer, this descent
more or
into...
less. More or less, yes. And this is why Gnostics oftentimes praised Lucifer, because they saw Lucifer as humanity. Yes.
And so this
This
story...
is also why many Gnostics demonized Yahweh for punishing Lucifer. So it's interesting because it's a complete inverse to the idea of the Christian doctrines. Certain Gnostic schools, that is.
Interesting. So this story of Lucifer turning his back on God and descending into matter, that you said is also reflected in the Innana myth. That is a truth of Lucifer as an angelic being, or what is the truth of that?
Well, there's many truths to it. There's many takes on it. There's not just one angle here. So the idea is, yes, Lucifer represents a type of angelic frequency, even an angelic frequency that could be invoked. It's an angel of beauty. There's more to it than that. There's a lot you can look into here, for you'll find that to the Romans, Lucifer was not an angel, but was actually a lesser god. So it depends on the idea of the cultural take that you take. Those will all give you different pictures of what Lucifer is. That's why we were sort of teasing this Christian notion, because it's claiming sort of that that's the objective only one that's real, when it's not. Lucifer's different things to different groups across time. And it just means bringer of light, truly, or light bearer. So, as you can see, there are many references here to the idea of forms of consciousness that have densified themselves into form. Because as you know, you are all light bearers. You are all beings of light, but your light is, in a sense, more concealed. It's less obvious, but you're all that. So Lucifer just represents the idea of consciousness incarnating into form. That's it. There's nothing evil about it. The evils that are associated with that really are people's projections about what it is to live in a material world. And many of your traditional schools and institutions have seen this material world as negative because it's a place where you have both pleasure and suffering. And it seems to be a place where pleasures can lead you into suffering. And they don't know how to navigate it, so they judge it. And they see it as a demonic place or a lesser place. Therefore, Lucifer in that paradigm becomes demonized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And with this idea of the light bearer, it also reminds me of Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods and gives it to humanity. And I wonder if there's a connection there.
There's a link here. Yes, there's a big link here.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Now, the idea here is that this particular archetype that you call Prometheus has to do with certain humans whom were able to access high levels of consciousness. And these beings were able to make contact with higher level, you could say, forms of intelligence. These are beings that exist in realms above the physical. You might call them extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional. And they were able to acquire the idea of different insights, different schematics, different downloads that would allow for them to create in marvelous ways on Earth. So Prometheus as an archetype represents the individual whom is able to ascend to the highest levels of consciousness to make contact with macro level intelligences there, allowing for them to receive insights and downloads that they could then disseminate to other humans, shaping human culture and society. So in a certain way, whenever you're doing magic, you're sort of working with that same archetype.